So Del Toro clearly loves Lovecraft. I mean, we all kind of do. His work has inspired so much stuff. He tried to make At the Mountains of Madness. For whatever reason, that didn't happen. But he did get to make Cabinet of Curiosities. Do these anthology shows ever have happy endings? I mean, ever? So I tried to get this review out before Halloween, but personal commits and general lack of headspace kind of got in the way. But even outside the context of Halloween, this is a great watch, and it's definitely one that's worth talking about. Hi, and welcome back to the inside of my head. Let's talk about Cabinet of Curiosities. Indeed. So I've always loved anthology stuff like Twilight Zone and Outer Limits, and this is that same format with Del Toro being the narrator, much like this guy from the Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock in whatever that one was. I'll Google it later. Oh god damn it, was it just called Alfred Hitchcock Presents? Where Del Toro introduces each story by taking some artifact or memento from the cabinet of the title. Anyway, all that's pretty obvious from the trailer. What I didn't realize beforehand was how focused it was on Lovecraftian horror. I was surprised to find out that 2 or 3 of these are actually based on Lovecraft short stories from the man himself. That's why I said that. But let's summarize, ep by ep, and I'll give you my thoughts as we go. So episode 1 is called Lot 36. So you saw the title of this video, right? And yeah, it's this one that almost made me stop watching the whole series, because it's a pretty slow start to the series and doesn't really give any hint of what's to come. It's based on a short story by Del Toro himself, as are a few of these, and it's about this guy. I hesitate to call him a redneck, but he's definitely a blue-collar, working-class kind of guy, the kind of guy who's been trodden on a few too many times by society and has turned pretty bitter as a result. I did understand this character, but it didn't feel like he was given many redeeming features to counterbalance it. So he came off as kind of a dick. He also made a couple of really stupid decisions in there, which, don't do him any favors when you're trying to like the guy. So he's one of those guys that you see on the History Channel who buy these storage lockers full of a dead person's stuff in the hope that there's something valuable in there. And of course, he finds some satanic books in there, and the plot goes from there. And the plot culminates in the discovery of this thing, which was very cool, but not really enough to lift the whole ep. Sometimes I find if there's a meaty enough payoff at the end, I can overlook many of the misgivings, but this wasn't quite enough. Most of these short films are slow burners, there's no doubt about it, but in the other eps, it didn't really bother me. But here, either because the characters were interesting enough, or I don't know, they always had something to stop me zoning out. But this one, I did notice it dragging in some places. It's kind of predictable, too. There's nothing that's really going to take you by surprise, and although there's nothing particularly wrong with it either, it's definitely one of the weakest, if not the weakest, especially compared to the next one. So the second one is called Graveyard Rats, and I love this one. Let's get that out of the way right now. There might be a little gushing. And whereas the previous ep's biggest weakness was the fact you didn't really like the main character, this one is kind of the opposite. This guy is a guy who is doing horrible things, but at least he seems to realize that this is horrible and is only doing it out of desperation. And that's what's so likable about him. So he's in charge of looking after a graveyard, and in the heyday of the grave robber, keeping their filthy mitts off anyone looking to steal valuable items from the recently deceased. Thing is though, as soon as he's chased the vagabonds away, he dives in himself and takes the jewelry and gold teeth for his own pocket to help pay off his debts. The only problem with his plan though is the rats. Yep, there are a network of tunnels underneath the graveyard inhabited by an innumerable amount of rats, and they keep dragging away the corpses from right under his nose. With pressure from the local mob mounting, he finds out about a priceless sword that's going to be buried with an admiral or a nobleman or something, I can't remember. So he breaks open the coffin, only to have the dead body dragged away from right in front of him. So he launches himself into the network of tunnels. He comes face to face with the Rat Queen, which is awesome. I love this thing. Like Stan Winston could not have designed this thing better himself. Before he realizes that there's a supernatural element at play here, when he comes across a room with a mountain of bones and artifacts, he's drawn to this, and once he steals it, awakens some sort of zombie. So with this one, I really love the setting. I'm not sure where or when it's set, but it's got a real Victorian feel. So I'd say 1900s. And that's a period that always gives a great atmosphere. Overall, this was one of my favorites. The next one, Autopsy, is an interesting one. Doctor who's called in to figure out what the deal is with this guy who died when he caused an explosion in the mine. He turns out to be a guy who got taken over by a parasitic alien who blew up the mine to destroy his spaceship so that it couldn't be captured and studied. Like most of these films, it's a slow burner, but the pacing didn't bother me like the first episode did. It had enough to keep me involved until the final third, where everything ramped up in the makeshift morgue in the middle of the night, and the alien tells the Doctor he wants to take over his body, and as a result, essentially has to do an autopsy on himself. It's excruciating to watch. I found this scene truly horrific. The way that they're having this pretty relaxed conversation and the guy is... Well, I don't want to get too graphic here, but yeah, it's disturbing. I think this one is as close to a happy ending as we're going to get in this series, in that our main character does come out on top, but it's still not exactly happy, in that he still has to mutilate himself something awful and die to do so. Very good ep, but not my favorite, but up there. Episode 4, The Outside, combines elements of 80s horror classics like Serial Mom, maybe that's a bad example. Things like Stepford Wives, and there's a little element of Annihilation in there too, all wrapped in this Christmas setting which always reminds me of Gremlins. It's about this oddball woman who works in a bank full of these appearance-obsessed and gossip-obsessed Stepford Wives, and they're all using this beauty cream that promises to not only rejuvenate your appearance, but outright change your life. So she starts schlacking it on, even bathing in the stuff, which clearly has a mind of its own. This one is another solid one, which really didn't rewrite any rulebooks. I felt like it was ground that had been trodden on quite a few times before, but the main character is so good. Like, she's great. She's so quirky. At one point going out and shooting a duck and stuffing it to give us a birthday present, thinking that this superficial asshole here was gonna like it. Without getting into too much detail, it's another one of those happy endings, which is kind of bittersweet. Like, happy for the character because she does get what she wants, but from our point of view, utterly horrible because of the price she had to pay to get it and the lengths she was willing to go to achieve that. Number 5, Pickmans Model is one of the ones based on a Lovecraft short story, and it might be my favorite of all of them. Bar one, maybe. Now, I didn't know anything about this short story beforehand, not that I know much about Lovecraft at all, so I can't really compare the two, but it's about an artist whose whole life starts to crumble after he sets eyes on the dark and twisted paintings of this guy, the titular Pickman. He's played by Crispin Glover, who is just a master of playing fucked up weirdos. He was the bad guy in Charlie's Angels, remember that? And in this, he's this odious, sinister, he's creepy, he's absolutely brilliant. I did feel that this one could have been a little faster paced, but I guess the fact that it is slow just lets you sit in this feeling of dread that it creates. I won't spoil anything too much, but the ending is great, like when you realize what Pickman's artwork is based on, and this creature comes out of this well. Like, again, great creature design. I love it. Look at this thing. Then we have Dream in the Witch House, which sees Rupert Grint from Harry Potter trying to track down his twin sister in the afterlife after she died when they were children. He finds this drug that transports him to this spooky forest of the dead where a witch, and this is possibly the best portrayal of a witch that I've seen. I'm trying to think of a better one, but I can't. But anyway, the witch tries to cross back with him and take on human form. Surprisingly good, this one, mainly because Rupert Grint is surprisingly good. Harry Potter did not pop once into my head while I was watching this, and that's saying a lot. Like, I'm sure he's had problems getting away from that character. He did it here really well. There's this grotesque rat with a human face that talks, and I was, oh, it's gonna haunt my dreams forever, that. I was a little confused about the ending on this one, but the payoff with the witch did put it up there with the better ones. And just as I thought, oh wow, this is going really well, we've had a number of good eps, one really good ep, along comes number 7, The Viewing, and smashes the whole thing out of the park. This one was directed by the same guy that did Mandy, one of the most WTF films I have seen in a long time. And from the very first visual you see, from the very first sound you hear, his style is all over this, and I love this guy's style. It's about these 5 people, experts in whatever field it is that they work in, who are invited to some rich guy's house to view some mystery thing. They don't know what. So they just sit there for ages, just talking and drinking fine whiskeys and doing drugs, but literally just sitting there, and it never once gets boring. And when they finally get into the viewing room, well, listen, I'm going to spoil it for you. If you haven't watched it yet, you should really experience it for yourself. But basically, you ready? Here we go. Spoilers. But basically they go into this room to see the weirdest space rock you ever saw. They figure out that there's something alive within it before this guy blows some smoke over it, which somehow the rock inhales, sparking a chain reaction where the rock crumbles and this disgusting ooze comes out of it and takes over RoboCop here and turns him into, well, see for yourself. Brilliant creature design, mysterious, unquantifiable, like everything, like the definition of something alien. This episode is one of the best series. No, I think it's the best in the series. Overpowering visuals, overpowering sounds. I love the characters in this. Perhaps it ended a touch abruptly, and I'm not sure what the conclusion was. If there was a conclusion, I have to go and watch it again. But on first viewing at least, whatever conclusion that it was drawing, I think I missed it. And if you're wondering how they were going to top that in the last episode, well, they didn't really. But not because it was bad, because it wasn't. Because it wasn't. Not. What? The last episode was actually really good. It was just a whole different ballgame to the one that came before. It was much more subtle and softer in its approach. And it reminded me a little bit of The Others and movies like that. You know, the type of thing that's almost like a stage play, actually. And it was about these two bird watchers who were great characters in themselves and played really well by these two actors. But once you get past the characters, it's a bit like, okay, so they go to this remote location to stay in this haunted house, and it becomes a little predictable. It still had quite a powerful ending though. But when you boil it down, if you've seen any haunted house movie, you've kind of seen this one. Okay guys, I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on Cabinet of Curiosities. In particular, which episode you thought was the best and why. You know where the comments are. But just to conclude, I'd just like to say that what I love about Del Toro is that even though some of his stuff will be flawed, you always feel that passion. In this case, for Lovecraftian inspired horror. So yeah, I really hope this gets a season 2.